Thus, in our Middle Ages, forbidden loves thrived, half-hidden, yet deeply human. They remind us that even under the weight of law, custom, and religion, the heart sought freedom. That even when silence was demanded, longing found its way to speak. And though danger walked beside them, lovers dared. For to love, even secretly, was to feel fully alive. Close your eyes and let us drift back into the Middle Ages, into a world of candlelight and stone walls, of church bells and whispered prayers, of marriage beds and secret desires. This is not a tale of kings and battles, but of ordinary men and women. How they loved, how they touched, how they longed, how they prayed. Drawn from history, but told in a soft voice for rest, this journey will take you through village lanes, quiet chambers, and winding pilgrimage roads, where love was sacred, yet also forbidden, tender, fearful, and achingly human. Settle in, breathe slowly, and let the past unfold like a dream. The fire burns low upon the great hearth, and its light dances faintly upon the smoke-darkened beams of the hall. It is late, so late that the dogs have curled themselves into small, tight circles of fur and breath, their sides rising and falling with the rhythm of deep animal sleep. Outside, the wind moves slowly along the wooden shutters, making them creak like tired voices, and the thatch above hums with the endless murmur of air and straw. I sit by the embers with cloak wrapped close, and I think of love, and I think of flesh, and I think of how these things were lived in the age into which I was born, the 13th century, the reign of King Henry, when England was bound in both faith and fear. The rushes upon the floor crackle beneath every step. They are strewn with sweet herbs, lavender, meadowsweet, and tansy, for the air grows foul if the straw is not renewed. Their fragrance lingers even now, faint and dusty, mixing with the smoke of tallow and the sharp smell of old wool. These scents belong to life here, as much as bread and ale. They cling to the body, to hair and to skin, and even to the folds of linen sheets where men and women lie at night. It is here, in this hall, by this fire, that I begin to tell what medieval love truly was. Not the bright dream sung by minstrels, nor the stern command shouted from pulpits, but the lived thing, tender, clumsy, aching, holy, sinful, secret, and common all at once. In my time, marriage was the bond most blessed by God, and yet also the bond most bound in law and custom. A boy and a girl did not always choose each other freely. Often their hands were joined by parents, by lords, by the needs of land and dowry. Yet beneath the contract there was still the human heartbeat, the shy smile at a feast, the warmth of a hand brushing against another as bread was passed, the quickened breath when two were left alone in the shadow of an orchard. The church taught that love was a holy mystery, yet it also laid down stern rules. One must not wed within forbidden degrees of kinship. One must not lie together before vows were spoken. One must not embrace in ways deemed unchaste. But people are people, and though priests thundered from the pulpit, young men still sang beneath the windows of girls, and girls still blushed when knights lifted them in the dance. Love, in those days, was not always soft and gentle. It could be a bargain, a strategy, a wound. But I will not tell it harshly. I will tell it as it was felt in whispers, in touches, in the silence between words. The hall around me is dim now. Only a single rushlight remains, its flame trembling like a living thing. And the shadows grow long upon the tapestries. The cloth upon the walls tells stories too, stitched hunts of deer, battles long past, saints with pale halos. But beneath the woven saints, in the rushes on the floor, men and women sometimes sought warmth of another kind. Yes, it is true, though, the noble lord had his chamber above, and the lady hers beside him, the servants, the squires, the maids, all lay here in the hall, pressed together on pallets of straw. At night, when the fire burned low and the hush of sleep fell across the room. There were sighs that did not belong to dreams. The shuffle of cloth, the quick breath, the rustle of straw told their own stories. The church might condemn, yet life continued. A child might be born 9 months later, and then the priest must baptize it, whether begotten in wedlock or not. The world was not neat, and desire did not wait upon rules. When I was young, I was told of courtly love, that noble invention of poets and troubadours from France. They sang of knights who served ladies as humbly as vassals served lords, of men who languished in longing, who kissed but never claimed. Such tales were sweet, like honey upon bread, yet they were far from the earth beneath my feet. For in truth, peasants in their cottages did not sing of unattainable desire. They wed early sometimes a girl at 12, a boy at 14 if the harvests allowed, and families agreed. Their beds were coarse linen upon straw, their union sealed by need as much as by passion. Yet I have seen the laughter in their eyes when they sat together by the hearth, children in their laps, ale in their cups. Love was there too, not less true for being simple. And among the nobility, though marriages were arranged, though a lady might be given to a man twice her age, still her heart might beat faster for a squire. Still her eyes might follow a troubadour's hands upon his lute. Human longing is not stilled by parchment or seal. I remember once, long ago, being told of the marriage ceremony itself. It took place most often at the church door, in sight of all, beneath the gaze of heaven and the village alike. The boy and girl joined hands, their fingers trembling perhaps with fear, perhaps with joy, and the priest spoke words that bound them as surely as iron binds oak. The ring was of simple gold, if they could afford it, of brass or bronze, if they could not. A token, small, but filled with meaning. Then, after Mass, the couple was led to their home, and the bed was blessed. Sometimes, in noble households, guests would follow into the chamber to witness the union, to laugh and to sing until the curtains were drawn. To us it may seem strange, even cruel, but in their world, marriage was not private. It was a thing of community, of lineage, of land, and of law. Yet when the door closed, when the rushlight burned low, then it was two bodies alone, with all their nervousness, all their hope. I imagine the coarseness of the sheets, the smell of straw and smoke, the awkward weight of garments hastily removed, the whisper of breath in the cold of the chamber. They were as human as we are, fumbling, yearning, sometimes gentle, sometimes fearful. The past is not made of marble, but of flesh. The fire sighs now, a last collapse of wood into embers. The warmth is soft, like the touch of a cloak drawn close. I speak softly, for I wish my words to fall not as thunder, but as snow, quiet, slow, each flake settling gently. This is how we must begin. In the hall, by the fire, remembering that in medieval England, love was both sacred and ordinary, both bound by the church and freed by desire. It was not always romantic, not always fair, not always kind. Yet it was lived in the market, in the manor, in the cloister, in the fields. In the chapters to come, I will tell you more of how men courted women with song and gift, of how the church blessed and cursed desire, of how beds were shared, of how secrets were kept. But for now, let the embers glow, let the rushes rustle faintly in the night, and let us rest in the knowledge that even in the 13th century, beneath rough cloth and stern law, hearts beat, and lips sought lips, and love endured. The morning comes softly in the village, and with it comes the sounds of life. The cocks crow long before the sun has risen above the low hills, and their cries echo against the damp stone walls. The air smells of wood smoke and dew, and the earth itself seems to hold its breath in the pale light. I draw my cloak about me and walk slowly, for I am thinking of how love began, in those days long ago, not in chambers or at the altar, but in the fields, in the markets, in the weaving of everyday life. Courtship, we call it now. Yet in the 13th century, the path between man and woman was less a straight road than a winding track, hemmed by custom, by law, and by the eyes of neighbors. In the village, boys and girls grew up close. They labored side by side, carrying water from the stream, tending sheep on the green, planting beans in the furrows. From the time of childhood, they knew one another's voices, laughter, tempers, and secrets. It was in these small moments, a splash of water at the well, a song sung during the harvest, the brushing of a sleeve as baskets were lifted, that a kind of tenderness began to stir. And yet, desire was never free of watchfulness. A girl might blush at the glance of a boy, but her mother's eyes were quick, her father's ears sharp. To be seen as too forward was dangerous, for gossip traveled faster than a bird's wing, and a reputation, once stained, could not easily be cleansed. The church spoke sternly of modesty, of purity, of chastity before marriage. Yet the world was full of places where young people could find each other. There were fairs, with their stalls of cloth and honey, their music of fiddles and drums. There were festivals May Day, midsummer, when the village danced beneath the green branches, and laughter ran like ale from a jug. There were fields and orchards, quiet at dusk, where shadows grew long and words grew bold. I remember a tale told of May Day customs. At the 1st of May, when blossoms crowned the hawthorn, the young men of the village would rise before dawn to go a-maying. They cut branches of greenery, they sang as they walked, and they placed flowers upon doors and windows. It was a festival of spring, of new life, of fertility. The church frowned upon the old customs, yet it could not extinguish them. And in the early morning light, as garlands were woven and songs lifted, many a boy found courage to speak to a girl. Many a girl let her eyes linger a moment longer than was proper. A glance became a smile became a word became a touch of hands. Such was the slow weaving of affection. Among the nobles, courtship was spoken of differently. There, the poets and troubadours gave shape to desire. They told of courtly love, the knight who served a lady as though she were his sovereign, the lady who bestowed a favor, a glance, a ribbon tied about his sleeve. It was a love often painted as pure, distant, even painful. The knight languished, the lady commanded. Yet even in castles, with their stone walls and stern rules, true affection sometimes bloomed. A squire might write clumsy verses upon a scrap of parchment, hiding it within the folds of a lady's book of hours. A lady might drop a kerchief in the tilt-yard, knowing full well whose hand would rush to retrieve it. Beneath the watch of stewards and chaplains, hearts still found their secret language. And what of kisses? Ah, kisses were not so freely given as now. A kiss was weighty, binding. In truth, a kiss upon the lips, before witnesses, could be taken as a pledge of marriage itself. To press lips together was to seal more than affection, it was to make a promise. Thus, many a youth trembled before daring such a thing. And yet, in the shadows of a barn, in the cool air of an orchard, lips did meet, softly, briefly, with all the sweetness of stolen fruit. There were tokens, too. A girl might give a ribbon, a sprig of rosemary, a carved wooden brooch. A boy might fashion a song upon his flute, or bring a small gift from the fair, a pewter pin, a strip of dyed cloth. Such things were not costly, but they carried weight, for they were signs of intention, whispers made visible. Not all was innocent, of course. There were rougher games played at the edges of the fields, bolder words spoken after ale. There were quarrels, rivalries, jealousies that burned like nettles. And there were dangers, for a girl's honor was guarded fiercely, and a boy too forward might find himself beaten, or worse, dragged before the manor court. Yet even in these shadows, love found its way. The sound of the village itself was filled with it, the laughter of young people at the well, the murmur of voices during harvest feasts, the soft singing of ballads as twilight fell. One might hear a maiden singing as she spun wool, her voice carrying through the open door, and know without asking for whom the song was meant. I think of the medical beliefs of the time, for even love was explained by physicians and scholars. They spoke of humors, hot and cold, wet and dry, and they believed desire was a fire within the blood. Too much heat made a man lustful. Too much cold made him weak. Women, they thought, were colder, more moist, and so their desire was hidden. Yet when stirred, it could burn with sudden strength. Such was the wisdom of Galen, carried through the centuries, whispered in the halls of learning. And so, even as boys and girls walked in orchards, scholars in distant cloisters wrote of passion in the language of medicine. Both sought to explain the same mystery: why the heart quickens, why the hand trembles, why the eyes cannot look away. The church bells toll in the distance, heavy and slow. The sound rolls across the fields, through the air damp with morning, through the smoke of hearths just kindling. In that sound is both warning and blessing. For the church sought to bind love, to direct it toward holy marriage, toward children, toward order. Yet the bells rang also for joy, for weddings, for feasts, for dances held in the churchyard. In those dances, the village moved together, hand in hand, foot to foot, in circles and lines. The stamping of shoes upon the earth, the fiddler's bow across the strings, the clapping of hands, the laughter of children, all this filled the air. And there, in the dance, a boy might draw close to a girl, might whisper into her ear, might breathe in the scent of her hair, the warmth of her breath. In the dance, courage was found, and hearts confessed themselves without words. So courtship, in my 13th century, was both simple and bound about with care. It was in the flowers of May, in the songs of the harvest, in the shy glances of the market. It was in tokens given, in ribbons tied, in the soft press of hands. It was guarded by parents, watched by neighbors, judged by priests, yet still it bloomed, stubborn as a wild rose at the edge of the field. And when two at last declared themselves, when words were spoken and promises made, the path led toward marriage, with all its solemnity, all its weight. But that is another tale, for another chapter. For now, let the memory linger of youth in the fields, of music in the village square, of green branches cut at dawn, of lips meeting in the hush of twilight. Let it linger softly, like the scent of meadowsweet in the rushes, like the echo of a song carried by the wind. The bells of the parish church are tolling, heavy and solemn, though the morning itself is bright. The mist is still clinging to the hedges, and the air smells of damp earth and wood smoke. But in the square before the church, there is color. There is music. There is the murmur of voices, rising and falling like a tide. Marriage, in my 13th century, was not merely the joining of two hearts. It was the joining of families, of lands, of fortunes, of souls. And it was, above all, a sacrament, a holy bond in the eyes of God. See how they gather at the church door, for that is where the vows are spoken. Not within the nave, before the high altar. No, that space is for Mass, for sacraments more solemn still. But marriage is made at the threshold, where the holy place meets the world outside, where all may see and hear. The priest stands ready in his vestments, the book of prayers in his hands, the cross of Christ raised high upon the wall behind him. The bride comes, veiled perhaps in linen, her gown of wool dyed with madder or woad, her hair bound with a ribbon or a garland of flowers. She is young, often, not more than 14 or 15 years, and her steps are small, careful, for all eyes are upon her. The groom waits, older more often than not, with his kin beside him. His cloak is clasped at the shoulder, his boots oiled, his belt shining with brass. He looks solemn, for the weight of duty rests upon him. Yet in his chest his heart may be quick. For though this marriage was arranged by fathers and sealed by dowry, still it is a beginning of flesh and life. The priest lifts his voice. The Latin is sonorous, the syllables long and heavy, though most who hear do not understand their meaning. But then come words in the tongue of the people. Do you take this woman? Do you take this man? The couple joins hands. Their fingers tremble, whether from cold, from fear, or from the rush of feeling that comes when two lives are bound together. The priest blesses the union, making the sign of the cross above their hands. A ring is given. If the family is wealthy enough, a simple band of gold, sometimes a stone set within, but more often plain, for plainness is considered pure. Man places it upon the woman's finger, saying words that bind her, not only to him, but also to God's order. With this ring I thee wed, with my body I thee worship, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow. The onlookers murmur, some smiling, some whispering. For all marriages are both public and private, an agreement witnessed by the village, yet felt most keenly by the two who now stand hand in hand, no longer separate. After the vows, Mass is said within the church. The bride and groom kneel upon the cold stone floor, the smell of incense rising about them, the wax of candles dripping slowly. The light through the windows falls pale and colored upon their veils and cloaks, upon their bent heads. They hear the chanting, the deep, rolling voice of the priest, the faint chime of the sacring bell. The bread is lifted, the wine is blessed. They taste the body and the blood of Christ, as all faithful do, for marriage is not apart from faith, it is woven into it. When they rise again, they are husband and wife. Yet the ceremony does not end there. There is a procession, a leading forth. The guests pour into the churchyard, their voices loud now, their laughter bright. Flowers are thrown, sometimes grain symbols of fertility, of harvests yet to come. Pipes and fiddles strike up, and the young dance upon the green, their shoes stamping, their skirts whirling. The bride and groom are led to their new home, or to the chamber prepared for them. Sometimes, in noble houses, the bed itself is blessed by the priest sprinkled with holy water, a prayer spoken over the sheets. Guests may follow into the chamber, bearing torches, singing, jesting. Some even stay until the curtains are drawn. It seems strange to us, and yet, in that world, marriage was not private. It was a thing for all to see, for all to guard, for all to confirm. At last, the door closes, the rushlight is lit, and the two are left alone. That is the beginning of another story, the story of flesh and tenderness, of fear and of comfort, of the first night. But let us linger still in the marriage feast, for there is joy to be tasted there. The tables are set with trenchers of bread, with roasted meats, with jugs of ale and wine. The air is heavy with the scent of roast goose, of spiced pottage, of baked apples steaming upon the platters. Laughter rises like smoke, songs are sung, toasts are shouted. The bride sits at the high table, her cheeks flushed, her eyes lowered. The groom beside her, grave and proud, though his hand may rest lightly upon hers beneath the board. Around them, friends and kin lift their cups, the clatter of wooden bowls and knives ringing in the smoky hall. It is not merely the union of two, but of many. A marriage joins households, binds villages, knits together lands. It brings peace between families, alliances between lords, new labor to the fields, new heirs to the manor. The feast celebrates all of this, not only the passion of youth, but the weaving of the whole community. The church taught that marriage was indissoluble once bound. No man could put asunder what God had joined. There were few escapes, save through annulment for consanguinity or for vows broken. Thus, the choice of partner, though often made by others, was final. A girl might weep, a boy might resist, but once their hands were joined at the church door, their lives were one. And yet, within that bond, love could grow. I have seen marriages begun in fear that ripened into tenderness, into trust, into the quiet companionship of two who labor side by side, who share hearth and table, who raise children together. Love, like ivy upon stone, often grew after the mortar had long since hardened. As the feast wanes, the rushes are scattered with scraps, the candles drip low, the fiddler's bow grows weary. Children fall asleep in corners, their heads upon their mother's laps. The hall grows warm with breath and fire, with the press of bodies, with the weight of the day. The bride and groom are led at last to the chamber. A blessing is spoken at the threshold. The bed curtains are drawn, the door closed. Outside, the laughter fades, and silence settles upon the house. Inside, two young souls face one another in the dim light, with all the awkwardness, the nervousness, the trembling hope of the first night. But that is for another chapter. Marriage, in my 13th century, was at once holy and earthly. It was woven of faith, of law, of duty, of flesh. It was a sacrament, but also a contract, a vow before God, but also a feast among men, a public union, but also the most private of bonds. And so it stands, a threshold in life's passage from youth to adulthood, from family to family, from self to shared being. The church door, the priest's blessing, the ring, the feast, the bed. These were the steps by which love, however shy, however uncertain, entered into the eyes of God. Let the memory of the bells linger. Let the smell of incense and roast goose remain upon the air. Let the faint shimmer of candlelight rest upon the mind, as softly as a veil laid across a bride's brow. For in such moments, love was not only a matter of the heart, it was a matter of heaven and earth, joined forever in the solemn, tender act of marriage. The hall has grown quiet. The last of the guests have stumbled to their pallets of straw, their laughter fading into the steady rhythm of sleep. The torches gutter low. The rushes upon the floor are trampled and strewn with scraps of bread, bones, and wilted herbs. In the high chamber above, a door closes gently, and the hush that follows seems deeper than any silence before. It is the bride and the groom at last, alone. The chamber smells of smoke and wool, of rushes newly laid upon the floor, of lavender and rosemary sprinkled there to keep the air sweet. A single rushlight flickers in the corner, its flame thin and uncertain, casting long shadows upon the plastered wall. The air is cool, for the stone of the manor keeps the chill even in summer, and the night wind seeps through the shutters. Upon the bed, coarse linen sheets have been spread, their fibers stiff from washing and lye, their whiteness a sign of purity. Beneath them is a mattress of straw, packed tight into a canvas sack, and atop it a blanket of rough wool, dyed in dull hues of brown and gray. To our eyes, it would seem hard, plain, but to them, it was a place of honor, a place newly blessed, a place set apart for this night. The bride lingers at the threshold, her breath faint, her hands clasped before her. She is young, scarcely more than a girl, her cheeks flushed from the feast, her hair bound loosely now, strands falling across her brow. She has been told, in whispers from older women, what is to come, enough to make her fearful, enough to make her heart pound within her chest. The groom stands beside the bed, solemn, uncertain. He too has heard tales from his kin, boasts from other men, warnings from priests. He has dreamed of this night. And yet, now that it is here, the weight of it is heavy upon his shoulders. He knows that all the village expects heirs, that the church commands fruitfulness, that his family awaits the proof of union. And yet he sees, before him, not duty, but the trembling figure of a wife, and he must find gentleness where others have spoken only of conquest. There is a prayer, softly spoken. Some couples kneel at the bedside, murmuring Pater Noster, seeking God's blessing before lying down. For the Church has taught that this act, though fleshly, is holy within marriage, sanctified for the bringing forth of children. Desire is not condemned here, but directed, ordered, placed within the chamber as fire is placed within the hearth, dangerous if loosed, but warming if contained. The bride sits upon the edge of the bed. The straw beneath rustles faintly. She touches the linen with her fingertips, rough against her skin, cool in the night air. She lowers her gaze, her lashes dark against her cheeks, and she waits. The groom removes his cloak, his boots, his tunic of heavy wool. Each garment falls with a soft sound upon the bench, the chest, the rushes. The air is chill against his skin. The flame of the rushlight trembles. He hesitates before her, unsure whether to reach, unsure whether to speak. At last he takes her hand. Her fingers are small, cold, trembling in his palm. He feels her pulse quicken. He feels his own heart thunder in reply. They're both unready, both afraid, and yet there is no turning back. The door is shut. The world outside waits, and the bed is theirs. The chamber holds its breath. The creak of the bed as they lie down together. The rustle of linen. The faint scent of rosemary rising from the floor. The bride closes her eyes, her body stiff at first, uncertain. The groom whispers words, awkward, halting, but meant to soothe. He touches her hair, her cheek, her hand, learning the shape of comfort before the weight of union. It is not as the poets sang. There is no perfect grace, no effortless ease. There is clumsiness, there is fumbling, there is fear. Yet within it, there is also tenderness, the beginning of a bond that may grow with time. The sheets are cold, but slowly they grow warm with breath, with closeness. The woolen blanket is drawn high, muffling the sound of whispers, holding the heat of bodies together. The straw mattress shifts and crackles beneath them, its scent earthy, faintly sweet. In the hush of that chamber, with only the rushlight watching, they cross the threshold from strangers, joined by law, to companions, joined by flesh. It is not an end, but a beginning, awkward, imperfect, human. Outside, in the village, the night passes as always. The owls call from the trees, the dogs stir and settle again. The river flows unseen in the darkness. None hear the faint sighs from the chamber. None see the faces turned toward one another in the glow of the candle. And yet, all will know, in the morning, that the union is made. In noble houses, sometimes the proof of the bed was sought, a sheet stained, displayed to kin, to lord, to priest. A cruel custom, pressing the most private act into the hands of others. Yet in humbler homes, there was only trust, only the quiet acceptance that marriage had begun. As dawn approaches, the rushlight gutters low. The shadows fade into the pale light of morning. The bride stirs, her hair unbound across the pillow, her cheeks softened with sleep. The groom lies beside her, his arm curled protectively, his breath deep and even. They are no longer strangers. Something has shifted, fragile but real. Soon the world will wake, the bells will ring for prime, the servants will stir. The day will begin with work and duty. But for this moment, the chamber holds them still, wrapped in the warmth of their first night, in the hush of linen and wool, in the fragile silence after fear has softened into closeness. Thus was the marriage bed in my 13th century, not a place of ease, not a place of polished romance, but a place of trembling, of prayer, of breath drawn in uncertainty and released in trust. The sheets were coarse, the blankets heavy, the mattress hard. Yet within them, lives were bound, children conceived, families begun. It was the chamber that made two into one, in the eyes of God and in the eyes of the world. And though the poets spoke of love as fire, and the priests spoke of marriage as duty, in truth it was often this: a cold room, a straw bed, two young souls learning to lie beside one another in the dark. And perhaps, from such small and trembling beginnings, true tenderness could grow as ivy grows upon stone, slowly, steadily, softening the hardness of the wall. The sun rises over the village once more. Smoke curls from the thatched roofs. Hens stir in their coops. The sound of the mill wheel begins its turning. Life resumes its ordinary rhythm. Labor in the fields, prayers in the chapel, bread baked upon the hearthstone. Yet beneath the steady surface of medieval life, there is always the undercurrent of longing. For not every heart is satisfied. Not every vow is easy to bear. And not every body rests content upon the bed that law and church have decreed. The church spoke with clarity. Love belonged within marriage, and marriage itself was indissoluble, ordained by God, holy and binding. Yet the human soul, restless and hungry, seldom fits wholly within the shape of commandment. And so, even in the 13th century, there were whispers of forbidden loves that strayed beyond the marriage bond, loves that bloomed where they ought not. The village knew these stories, though no one told them openly. A wife who lingered too long at the well, her eyes following a man not her husband. A husband whose hand rested upon the arm of a servant girl, too gently, too often. A knight who rode through the wood to meet a lady at dusk, their words cloaked in secrecy, their trysts hidden in chapels, in barns, in shadowed fields. Even the poets sang of such things, though with lofty words. They called it fin amour, courtly love, the devotion of a knight to a lady not his own, a passion bound by distance, by secrecy, by restraint. The songs told of stolen glances, of hands barely brushing, of longing more powerful than fulfillment. And yet, behind the poetry, there were real hearts that burned, real bodies that ached, real marriages strained by silence. To betray one's vows was not only a private sin, but a public danger. The church warned that adultery endangered the soul, that it drew down divine wrath upon household and village alike. The law, too, punished harshly when proof was found. In some towns, a woman caught with a lover might be paraded through the streets in her shift, her hair shorn, her shame made spectacle. A man could be fined, beaten, even cast from his lord's service. In noble courts, such sins could dissolve alliances, spark feuds, and bring ruin upon families. And yet, the risk never wholly silenced the desire. Imagine the wife, married young, her life bound to a man twice her age. Her days are long, filled with labor, her nights with duty. And then, one market day, she meets another, perhaps only a craftsman, perhaps only a boy, with laughter in his eyes, and something stirs. She does not plan it, does not welcome it, but it comes, as naturally as rain falls or grass grows. She finds excuses to linger where he works, to hear his voice, to feel her pulse quicken when his shadow falls across her own. Imagine the monk, vowed to celibacy, his hours ordered by bell and psalm. He tends the garden, he copies the texts, he bows his head in prayer. Yet when a pilgrim woman comes to the gate, asking for bread, and he sees her face in the morning sun, he feels a pang, sharp and forbidden, and he knows himself to be human still. He returns to his cell and beats his breast in penance. But the image does not leave him. Imagine the knight, sworn to serve his lord, to defend his lady's honor, to ride in the tourney for her favor. Yet honor itself grows tangled when he finds himself not merely serving, but desiring, not merely kneeling, but longing. And she, bound already to another man, meets his gaze with equal fire. The poets may dress it in fine words, but beneath is the simple truth. Two souls caught, two bodies yearning, two lives made perilous by a glance. The sounds of forbidden love are quiet, for they must be hidden. A creak of floorboard in the dark, a door opening when the house is still, the rustle of hay in the loft, the hush of footsteps along the churchyard wall, the whisper of names spoken too low for others to hear, the heartbeat loud in the chest, the breath quick and fearful, the skin hot beneath wool and linen. The scents are sharp sweat in the heat of a barn, candle wax melting in a chapel corner, damp earth beneath the trees where two kneel close together. There is sweetness, too. The scent of a flower tucked secretly into a sleeve, the taste of bread shared quickly, the warmth of a hand that lingers longer than it ought. And always the fear of discovery, fear of shame, fear of eternal damnation. For the priests preached with stern voice. Every touch outside of wedlock was sin, every stolen kiss a step toward hell. The lovers believed it, trembled at it, and yet, often, they returned again, unable to quench the fire once it had been kindled. Some were caught. Their names entered the records of bishops' courts, where parchment still holds the traces of their sorrow. Johanna, accused of lying with William the Smith. Thomas, taken in adultery with a married woman of the parish. They confessed, or denied, or wept, or fled. Punishments fell. Fasts, pilgrimages, fines, public penance. Some escaped, their secret never known. Their marriages endured, their households remained intact, their sin hidden beneath the veil of silence. Perhaps they repented in age, perhaps they carried it quietly to the grave. And some found in forbidden love not only sin, but solace, a gentleness they had not known in lawful bed, a tenderness that carried them through the harshness of daily life. It was not permitted, not blessed, but it was human, deeply human, and it left its mark upon the hidden history of the Middle Ages. In truth, love and desire in my century were not so different from those of yours. They were shaped by stricter law, sterner preaching, harsher consequence, but the heart itself was the same. It longed, it strayed, it hoped, it erred. The church set boundaries, the body pushed against them. And within that struggle lay the quiet, secret stories of men and women, monks and maidens, husbands and wives, who loved where they ought not, yet could not do otherwise. So when you think of medieval life, do not see only the public face, the marriage feast, the wedding bed, the priest's blessing. Remember also the shadows, the whispers, the glances at the well, the hurried steps at night, the trembling hand held in secret. Remember that behind the sermons and the punishments, there were hearts that beat, as yours does now, seeking warmth, seeking closeness, sometimes in ways forbidden, but always in ways deeply, unforgettably human. And in that quiet knowledge, let your own breath slow, your own thoughts grow gentle, and your body rest. For these stories, like the lives they tell, belong now to the past, leaving only a soft echo, like the fading of a bell at dusk. The body, in my century, was both familiar and mysterious. We lived within it. We labored with it. We suffered in it, and yet much of its inner working was hidden, explained through ancient theories, holy writings, and the slow wisdom of village healers. When it came to love, to desire, to the joining of man and woman, we turned to those same voices, seeking to understand what burned in the blood and what stirred in the womb. The learned physicians, trained in universities far from the village, spoke of humors. They told us that the body was made of four: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. To be healthy was to keep these in balance. To be sick was to have them disturbed. Desire itself, they said, came when the humors grew heated, when blood rose, when fire burned within. A man filled with too much heat was restless, urgent, lustful. A woman, too, they believed, could be overtaken by passion if her humors were stirred. The monks copied the texts of Galen and Hippocrates, preserving old knowledge. They described how the moon's cycle influenced a woman's monthly bleeding, how her fertility waxed and waned as surely as tides upon the shore. They drew diagrams of the womb, likening it to a vessel, to a hidden garden, to an inverted creature that opened and closed according to unseen rhythms. Yet for all the university learning, it was often the midwife who knew most of the living body. She had seen births, hundreds of them. She had heard the cries of labor, felt the pulse of life pushing through blood and sweat. She knew which herbs might ease a woman's pain, which oils might stir a sluggish womb, which charms, whispered softly in candlelight, might calm a frightened heart. She had no Latin words, no parchments, but she had hands that knew, eyes that had seen, and ears that listened. The smells of her cottage were sharp and green, fennel, sage, and rue hanging from the rafters, garlic and onion curing by the hearth, lavender crushed into oil, honey warming in a pot. The air was heavy with beeswax and smoke, yet sweetened by dried flowers tucked into chests and pillows. When a young bride came to her, shy and fearful, she would smile and brew a tea of chamomile to settle her stomach, of mint to clear her breath, of cinnamon to warm her blood. Desire, to the medieval mind, was both natural and dangerous. The church taught that it should be guarded, directed, tamed within marriage. Physicians warned that too much abstinence could harm the body, causing vapors to rise to the brain. They even wrote that a woman must reach her own climax for conception to occur, believing that her seed mingled with the man's to form new life. Thus, husbands were sometimes counseled to ensure their wives' pleasure, not for affection alone, but for the sake of children. And yet, silence clung around such matters. Few spoke openly of the body's stirrings. Words were whispered, half hidden in riddles, passed in the secrecy of women's chambers. Remedies for desire to increase it, to quiet it, to guard against its fruit were folded into prayers, into herbs, into charms. There were love potions too, though the church forbade them. Some said a cup of wine steeped with rosemary could inflame the heart. Others claimed that a draught of nettle seed mixed with honey could rouse the body to longing. To cool desire, one might drink vinegar or chew lettuce leaves, for lettuce was thought to bring sleep and chastity. The heart of a dove, dried and powdered, was whispered to draw affection. The root of mandrake, carved into a shape, was believed to make barren wombs quicken. Such remedies smelled of earth and fire, roots dug from damp soil, bitter herbs boiled until their scent filled the room, oils pressed from seeds and poured into clay vessels. The taste was sharp, acrid upon the tongue, but the hope was sweet. And when children came, or failed to come, the body was again the healer's concern. Infertility was feared, for a household without heirs stood fragile against time. Blame was often cast upon the woman, though physicians admitted that a man, too, might be cold or weak in seed. Remedies abounded, bathing in warm wine, eating almonds and pine nuts, lying upon one's back with hips raised after union. Some prayed to saints, leaving wax figures of infants upon the altar, hoping for blessing. The midwives whispered softer words, that stress and sorrow closed the womb, that kindness and warmth opened it. They told husbands to treat their wives with gentleness, to let laughter and rest join with love. The sounds of healing were quiet, almost like prayer. The bubbling of herbs in a pot, the murmur of a charm spoken low, the crackle of fire in the hearth, the rustle of cloth as a midwife wrapped a bandage, the sigh of relief as pain eased, the steady rhythm of breath as sleep returned. The textures, too, were many. Rough woolen blankets pulled tight in sickness, smooth linen cloths pressed cool upon the brow, sticky honey spread upon wounds, slick oil rubbed into weary skin. Even the body itself was touched, felt, examined pulse pressed beneath the fingers, a belly cupped in the hand, a cheek brushed to measure heat. But healing was not only herbs and hands, it was also faith. A priest might bring relics to the sick room, laying a saint's bone upon the chest, sprinkling holy water upon the bed. Prayers were said, candles lit, bells rung. Sometimes healing came, sometimes not, but always the soul was prepared, reminded that the body was only a vessel, passing and fragile, awaiting resurrection. Still, in the hush of night, when desire stirred, when love burned too fiercely, when a woman wept for children she could not bear, the body seemed more than a vessel. It seemed to hold mysteries no priest nor physician could wholly explain. It carried joy and sorrow, longing and loss, heat and cold, tenderness and ache. And so the healers worked as best they could, binding herbs, mixing brews, whispering charms, laying hands. They eased, they comforted, they tried. Their knowledge was imperfect, their remedies uncertain, yet their care was real. In every village, their work wove together the threads of love and life, binding the body's weakness with the soul's longing. When you close your eyes, you may hear their world, the bubbling pot, the crackling fire, the murmured prayer. You may smell the sage and lavender, the honey and smoke. You may feel the cool cloth upon your brow, the warmth of oil upon your skin. And you may rest, as they once did, in the knowledge that even centuries past, people cared for one another with all the wisdom they had, seeking to heal the body, to comfort the heart, to ease the quiet mysteries of love and life. The life of the body and the heart did not move alone in our century. It moved with the turning of the year. Love was not separate from the fields, nor from the church bells, nor from the slow passing of days that measured seed time and harvest. As the year unfolded, so too did the ways men and women touched, longed, and dreamed. In winter, the nights were long, and the days pale with frost. Within the hall or cottage, couples drew close, pressed together against the cold. Woolen blankets were piled thick, and fires roared upon the hearth. The air smelled of smoke, heavy and sharp, and of salted meats hanging in the rafters. Lovers whispered beneath furs, breath misting in the chill, hearts warmed more by closeness than by flame. Desire, then, was quiet, slow burning, softened by the weight of snow outside. Silence was the winter song. The only sounds were the crack of logs in the fire, the distant howl of wind, the soft creak of beds as lovers shifted under heavy cloth. In that darkness, intimacy felt hidden, secret, almost holy. For many children were conceived in those coldest months, when bodies clung together for warmth and comfort. Spring brought renewal, and with it, a quickening of the blood. The fields greened, flowers unfolded, lambs bleated in the meadows. Festivals returned. May Day, when youths danced about the maypole, weaving ribbons bright with color. Young men wore garlands, young women plucked blossoms to braid in their hair. Songs filled the air, pipes and drums carried across the village square. It was in spring that courtships often ripened. Warm evenings allowed stolen meetings beneath blossoming trees. The scent of hawthorn was sharp, sweet, and almost intoxicating. Many believed it stirred desire, and so a maiden might blush when a sprig of hawthorn was offered to her. Hands touched more boldly in spring, laughter rang louder, and eyes lingered longer. The church frowned upon such freedom, warning against excess and sin. Yet even priests could not stop the tide of spring's awakening. As the earth itself swelled with life, so too did men and women feel their hearts and bodies swell with longing. Summer was labor, yet also joy. The sun blazed, fields filled with grain, hay was cut and stacked high. Sweat beaded upon brows, and the smell of grass lay thick in the air. Lovers often worked side by side, bending to reap, rising to tie sheaves, their laughter mixing with the songs of skylarks. Festivals of midsummer burned bright. Bonfires lit the night, sparks flying upward like prayers. Couples leapt hand in hand across flames, a charm for fertility and fortune. The heat of summer mingled with the heat of desire, bodies gleaming with sweat, voices ringing in song. The marriage season, too, often came in summer. With food plentiful and weather fair, weddings could be celebrated outdoors, beneath boughs strung with garlands. Wine flowed, bread was broken, and guests cheered as bride and groom shared their first kiss as husband and wife. The scent of roasted meats, of crushed herbs beneath dancing feet, of roses plucked for crowns, all lingered in memory as part of summer's embrace. Autumn was harvest. The air grew cooler, apples ripened, grapes were pressed into wine. Laughter rang in barns as neighbors gathered to thresh and winnow. Feasts of Thanksgiving filled the tables. Bread warm from the oven, honey dripping, cider foaming in mugs. For lovers, autumn was a time of gratitude, of rest after labor. Marriages made in spring and summer began to settle into the steady rhythm of home. New brides often found themselves carrying the child conceived in warmer days, their bellies beginning to swell beneath woolen gowns. Husbands grew protective, wrapping cloaks around their wives against the chill, walking beside them in fields golden with stubble. There was a sweetness in autumn, a calm contentment, the sound of geese flying overhead, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the smell of wood smoke drifting across village paths. All reminded lovers of life's passing, of seasons that turned like the wheel of fortune itself. The church, too, wove its calendar into the lives of lovers. Advent was a time of waiting, of restraint, when passion was set aside in preparation for Christ's birth. Lent, too, brought fasting and abstinence, when couples were urged to forego the marriage bed. Yet Easter was joy, a time of renewal, when bells rang out and fields burst with blossoms. Many a wedding was planned for Eastertide, so that new life in the world might echo new life in the soul. Saints' days, pilgrimages, fairs, all brought men and women together. A young man might first glimpse his beloved at a shrine, candlelight gleaming upon her face. A maiden might feel her heart stir as a pilgrim offered her a badge from a holy site. At fairs, beneath the bright stalls and cries of merchants, couples exchanged small tokens, a ribbon, a ring, a flower pressed between pages. Thus, love and desire were never apart from the year. They followed its rhythms, warm in summer, hushed in winter, bright in spring, gentle in autumn. The seasons gave shape to passion, as surely as they gave shape to sowing and reaping. And within those cycles, each lover carried private memories. The taste of mulled wine shared at Christmas, the feel of grass beneath the summer sky, the scent of apples at harvest, the hush of snow as two bodies clung for warmth. When you close your eyes, you may hear the turning of that medieval year. Bells at Easter, drums on May Day, laughter at harvest, silence in winter frost. You may smell roses, apples, smoke, honey, snow. You may feel rough wool, warm hands, cool linen, soft grass. And you may rest in the knowledge that love itself, then as now, is bound to the seasons of the earth, eternal in its rhythm, ever renewing with each turn of the wheel. Not all love was spoken. In our century, words were precious things, carried upon parchment by scribes, or breathed into the ear by poets. But most often, love passed silently, through glance and gesture, through the brush of a sleeve, the clasp of a hand. For in a world where marriages were arranged, where the church measured desire with stern warnings, and where neighbors' eyes were ever watchful, lovers learned to speak without speaking. The first touch was often accidental, or so it seemed. A hand grazing another while passing bread at the table. The brief pressure of knees touching beneath a bench in the hall. Fingers brushing while exchanging a jug of ale. To the unseeing, it was nothing. But to the two hearts caught in the moment, it was everything. A message, secret, unmistakable. There was a thrill in such touches, a trembling awareness that this, small as it was, carried weight greater than any spoken vow. For the body knew what the tongue could not dare to utter. The warmth of skin lingered longer than words might, setting the heart racing. Between husband and wife, too, touch spoke endlessly. The marriage bed was not only for passion, but for comfort. The hand that soothed in the night. The arm that shielded against fear. The gentle caress that reassured after quarrel. A wife laying her hand upon her husband's shoulder as he returned from the fields carried more than affection. It was welcome, rest, belonging. Children, too, learned love through touch. A mother stroking her infant's hair by firelight. A father lifting his child onto his shoulders during a fair. A grandmother patting her grandchild's hand while spinning flax. The body carried tenderness in ways words could never reach. Lovers unwed, in secret, learned the art of silence, most of all. To rest side by side upon meadow grass and simply let the backs of their hands touch was a daring act. The sound of bees hummed around them. The scent of clover rose. The sky wheeled wide above. And in that small point of contact, they felt whole worlds of longing. A stolen kiss was more than lips. It was the closeness of breath, the quickening of heart, the feel of another's hair against one's cheek, the soft tremor in the limbs. It was silence, and yet it roared within the soul, louder than any feast day bell. Even in marriage, silence and touch held mysteries. The ritual of undressing for bed was a language of its own. A wife folding her husband's tunic carefully, smoothing the creases with her hand. A husband unpinning his wife's veil, fingers brushing her hair. Each act was tender, deliberate, filled with quiet meaning. The rustle of linen, the soft sigh as garments fell away. These were words without speech. The bed itself became a language. To turn toward one another was invitation. To rest back to back was sometimes distance, sometimes trust. The curl of a hand upon a hip, the resting of a forehead against a shoulder, the twining of legs beneath the covers. Each gesture spoke more clearly than any phrase of love poetry. The church taught restraint, yes, but even priests understood that love needed its gentle tokens. They wrote of charity between spouses, of kindness made flesh in simple touch. Not passion only, but the small mercies of daily life, washing one another's hands, combing hair, rubbing aching muscles after long labor. Touch was healing. When illness struck, the feel of a cool cloth upon the brow, a hand steadying a weakened arm, carried more medicine than herbs alone. Many believed that love itself had power to cure, and so a kiss upon a wound, a mother's hand upon a fevered child, were given as freely as prayer. The unspoken reached further still. Lovers watched each other's movements, with eyes trained to read what others missed. The way one lingered at a doorway, the faint smile when a certain name was said, the lowering of gaze when feelings swelled too strong to conceal. Silence itself became a presence, thick with meaning, when two who longed for each other sat near, but dared not speak. In ballads sung by minstrels, such silences were exalted. A knight, gazing across a hall at a lady he adored, dared not declare his love. Yet her lowered lashes, her still hands upon her lap, her faint sigh in the music, all told him more than words. The people listening understood this language, for it was their own. To live in the medieval world was to live among constant watchfulness. Villagers knew each other's business. Nobles were surrounded by servants. Thus, the language of the unspoken was born of necessity. A single look across a crowded feast could bind two souls more tightly than hours of private talk. A hand upon a goblet, a ribbon tied upon a sleeve, a glance lowered at the right moment. All these spoke of hidden fires. In the quiet of the night, when the world lay still, such touches deepened. The sound of breathing, steady in the dark, became reassurance. The warmth of another's skin against one's own spoke of safety. Even absence had its language. The empty space upon a bed, the cool side of the pillow, the missing weight of a hand. Love was known in presence, yes, but also in the ache of what was not there. And so, in those centuries, men and women became fluent in this soft speech of the body. They learned that love did not always need words, that silence could sing, and that the gentlest brush of fingers could carry more truth than 1,000 promises. If you close your eyes, you may feel it still. The cool roughness of wooden tables, the smoothness of wool against your arm, the warmth of a hand resting just barely upon your own. You may hear the quiet crackle of fire, the sigh of a body turning beneath linen, the unspoken breath caught between two souls. This was the language of touch, quiet, hidden, yet eternal. And in it, lovers of the Middle Ages found not only passion, but peace. Love, in the Middle Ages, was not always simple. It was bound by the laws of God, the customs of the village, the honor of families, and the sharp eyes of neighbors. To love outside these bounds was to court danger. And yet, such loves blossomed, hidden like wildflowers in the cracks of stone walls. Forbidden love could be many things. It might be the bond between a married woman and the man she truly desired. It might be the passion of a priest sworn to celibacy, yet stirred by the gaze of a parishioner. It might be two young people of rival households, their families set against each other, their hearts drawn close despite all. Sometimes love itself became forbidden, simply because it burned too brightly, too soon, before fathers and mothers had given their consent. In villages, a girl who lingered too long at the well with a boy might be gossiped about before the sun had set. The dangers were real. Adultery, if discovered, could lead to public shame, punishment, even death in certain times and places. A priest caught in sin might lose his position, his livelihood, his honor. Lovers of mismatched rank risked disgrace and ruin. Yet precisely because the risks were so grave, the sweetness of stolen love was sharper, more intoxicating. Imagine, then, a young wife, her husband away on a trading journey. In the dusk, she lingers by the orchard, where the apple trees lean heavy with fruit. The air is sweet with the scent of ripening. And in the shadows, another waits, a man she has known since childhood, now grown, with eyes that search hers as though no world existed beyond them. Their meeting is brief, perhaps no longer than the time it takes for the vesper bell to toll. A hand clasped, a whispered word, the brush of lips, quick as the dart of a swallow. Fear hovers around them, yet the thrill is greater. For in that moment, they are free, though the whole world binds them. Lovers often found clever ways to meet. Minstrels sang of knights who slipped into castles, disguised as merchants, or of ladies who sent secret tokens, rings, ribbons, carved wooden hearts, through the hands of loyal servants. In villages, it might be simpler. A meeting at the edge of the woods under pretense of gathering herbs, or a pause at the mill, where the rush of water drowned quiet words. The landscape itself became a co-conspirator. The narrow lanes between hedgerows, the cool shade of a barn, the dark of a church at dawn, all offered refuge. Lovers learned to move like shadows, to speak in glances, to turn ordinary places into sanctuaries of passion. But forbidden love was not always fleshly. Sometimes it was nothing more than a yearning gaze, never acted upon. A clerk at his desk, copying sacred texts, might lift his eyes and watch the daughter of a nobleman pass by. He would never dare speak, but his heart ached with every brushstroke of ink. In his prayers, he whispered her name, as though weaving it into the fabric of eternity. Such unfulfilled loves could last a lifetime. They were not less real for being untouched. They burned inwardly, secret fires, giving warmth and pain in equal measure. The songs of the troubadours sung in courts of Provence and carried across Europe, often told of this very tension. Love that could not be fully possessed, love exalted by its very impossibility. They sang of ladies married to lords they did not love, of knights who yearned in silence, of longing kept pure by distance. In those songs, desire was painted as noble suffering, a refining fire for the soul. And so, even when never consummated, forbidden love was understood as one of life's most powerful experiences. Yet there were also darker tales. A jealous husband returning too soon, a secret discovered by a watchful servant. A whisper turned into accusation. Villages thrived on gossip, and what was whispered today could be shouted tomorrow in the marketplace. A woman caught might be shamed publicly, her hair cut short, paraded as a warning. A man might face whipping, exile, or worse. Still, the heart is stubborn. Though the risks were known, lovers continued to seek one another. For what was life, if not to feel the quickening of breath, the trembling of hands as fingers laced together in the dark? The senses sharpen in secrecy. A forbidden touch lingers longer than one freely given. The scent of hay in the barn, the cool damp of earth in the forest, the distant sound of bells, all become part of the memory, woven into the fabric of longing. Lovers carried such moments with them for years, treasures hidden deeper than coin or jewel. And even when parted, the world reminded them. A woman might pass a tree where once she met her beloved, and her heart would leap. A man might hear a song sung by a passing minstrel, and remember the hush of a night when every word seemed dangerous, and every silence even more so. There was sweetness in secrecy, but also sorrow, for every meeting was shadowed by fear of discovery. Every kiss might be the last. The very thought of being torn apart gave their moments a sharpness, like wine pressed from bitter fruit. And yet, these loves endured in memory. Old men and women, long settled into the patterns of duty, sometimes looked back and recalled, perhaps with a sigh, perhaps with a smile, the one forbidden love that once made their blood run quick. They spoke of it rarely, if at all, but in their hearts, it lived still. Thus, in our Middle Ages, forbidden loves thrived, half hidden, yet deeply human. They remind us that even under the weight of law, custom, and religion, the heart sought freedom. That even when silence was demanded, longing found its way to speak. And though danger walked beside them, lovers dared. For to love, even secretly, was to feel fully alive. If the village knew love as something woven into the rhythms of work and household, the castle knew it differently. Behind high walls and under painted ceilings, love became ritual, art, and game. It was not always fleshly, nor even permitted to be. Instead, it was elevated, refined into a code called finamore, or courtly love. Courtly love belonged to the world of the nobility, lords and ladies, knights and poets. It was sung by troubadours and carried by minstrels from one court to another. It was whispered in gardens, lit by torchlight, beneath tapestries depicting ancient myths. It was a love defined by longing, not possession. A knight might swear his heart to a lady who was already wed to another lord. The distance, the impossibility, was not a barrier. It was the essence. Desire was meant to be restrained, refined, purified by separation. The heart burned not because it was satisfied, but because it was denied. Picture the great hall of a 13th century castle in France. The walls glow with candlelight. The scent of roasted meats and spiced wine lingers in the air. Minstrels sing in the gallery, their voices clear, carrying the verses of Provençal poets. Knights in mail and ladies in gowns of velvet sit side by side at long tables. In this setting, glances become powerful. A knight lowers his eyes when the lady he serves passes by, a sign of humility. She, in turn, might drop a handkerchief, whether by accident or design, and he bends to retrieve it as though it were a relic. Nothing more is said, yet the air between them hums. Courtly love demanded patience and self-restraint. A knight would prove his devotion, not through touch, but through deeds. He might ride into battle, wearing her token tied to his arm, a ribbon, a sleeve, a piece of embroidery. He fought not only for glory, but for her unseen gaze, her imagined blessing. Poets compared this kind of devotion to service of God. Just as a monk bowed before the altar, so too a knight bent his will before his lady. Desire was transfigured into worship. To yearn was to purify. To ache was to be ennobled. The language of courtly love was full of metaphor. Lovers called each other lord and servant. A lady might be addressed as my light, my star, while the knight would humble himself as your prisoner. The higher she stood, the more he desired. And so, paradoxically, distance created intimacy. Because the lady was untouchable, every word, every glance carried weight. A look exchanged in a crowded hall might burn brighter in the memory than a night shared in secret. But though the ideals were lofty, reality was more complex. Not all ladies were content with merely being worshipped. Some sought more tangible affection. And not all knights kept their devotion pure. Some found ways to turn courtly gestures into real embraces. Still, even when consummated, such love was cloaked in ritual. The poems and songs painted it as noble, not base. To love in this refined way was to distinguish oneself from the roughness of peasants, whose unions were thought to be driven only by necessity and desire. Imagine a garden within the castle walls, roses climbing trellises, a fountain murmuring in the center. The evening is cool, the air scented with lavender and thyme. Here the lady and her knight might walk, careful to keep their distance, speaking softly of loyalty and dreams. Their hands never touch. Yet the rustle of her gown against the gravel path, the sound of his breath as he answers her, are enough to set their hearts racing. The restraint itself becomes pleasure. Every denied touch sharpens the longing. Every farewell, made before it could go too far, leaves the mind full of fire. Troubadours carried these ideals far and wide. They sang in Occitan, in French, in Italian. They praised the virtues of Domna, the noble lady, and the sufferings of her devoted knight. Their verses spread like perfume across Europe, shaping how nobles thought of themselves and their desires. In some courts, this even became a kind of game. Ladies would gather and hear a case of love, deciding whether a knight had truly proved his devotion, or whether his desire was unworthy. Rules were debated. Could true love exist in marriage, or only outside it? Was jealousy a sign of devotion, or of weakness? These playful courts of love gave shape to the ideals that colored noble life. Yet beneath the games and verses, a truth pulsed. Human hearts were never so tidy as poetry. A knight might pine for years, only to be denied. A lady might enjoy the admiration, yet give her true affection elsewhere. The songs lifted love to the level of art, but the souls who lived it still struggled, still yearned, still erred. The world of courtly love was fragile, shimmering like candlelight. It depended on distance, on unfulfilled longing, on ritual that turned desire into worship. In it, the senses were sharpened, the gleam of silk, the scent of roses, the tremor in a voice. Love became not only an emotion, but a performance, a way of being. And though centuries have passed, its echoes remain. We still speak of chivalry. We still dream of loves that are pure, noble, distant, impossible. The Middle Ages, with all their harshness, gave birth to a vision of love as art. And in that art, they found a kind of sweetness to balance the iron weight of duty. Thus, in the halls of castles, love took on another face. No longer only the furtive secret of village lanes, nor the lawful bond of husband and wife. It became something rarer, a flame kept alive, not by fulfillment, but by restraint. To desire, yet not to touch. To long, yet not to possess. To ache, and in aching, to feel alive. This was courtly love, both burden and blessing, both dream and discipline, both sorrow and song. The body in the Middle Ages was not silent. It was a landscape filled with mysteries, whispers, and divine symbols. To live within a body was to live within a fragile vessel of humors, fluids, and hidden fires. Every ache, every flush of heat, every sudden weakness carried meaning. And behind that meaning, the hand of God. When we speak of love in those centuries, we cannot separate it from the body. For the body was seen as both the stage upon which love played its drama, and the barrier that kept love always uncertain. Medieval medicine leaned upon the wisdom of Galen and Hippocrates, carried through Arabic scholars, and translated into Latin in candlelit scriptoria. At its heart was the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Each fluid was tied to temperament, to the very soul's leaning. Blood made one warm and sanguine, quick to laugh, quick to love. Phlegm cooled, bringing calm but also laziness. Black bile darkened, causing melancholy and longing. Yellow bile burned, giving fire, anger, and restlessness. A man or woman in love was often described through these fluids. Too much heat in the blood made the face flush, the pulse race, the breath quicken. Too much melancholy weighed the heart with sighs. Physicians would sometimes diagnose love itself as an imbalance, a sickness of the humors that needed treatment. Desire was not thought to live in the heart, as we say now, but in the liver. It was the liver that heated the blood, that carried warmth through the veins. The heart, for medieval thinkers, was the seat of spirit, of courage, of divine spark. But the liver, it was there that lust was born, rising like steam. And still, others whispered that the womb itself contained secret fires. Women were thought to carry within them a pull, a moistness and warmth that drew men as iron is drawn to the lodestone. Their monthly bleeding was both feared and honored, seen as a cleansing of excess humors, yet also as a reminder of dangerous powers. A menstruating woman, some said, could spoil wine merely by gazing upon it, or turn mirrors dark with her reflection. Yet within those same fears lay awe, the ability to bleed and yet live, the ability to swell with life, was a mystery that defied reason. It was God's secret woven into flesh. Love, when it spilled over into union, was also explained through the language of fluids and seeds. Both man and woman were thought to give seed, mingling them in the chamber of the womb. If the man's seed was stronger, a boy would be born. If the woman's seed prevailed, a girl would take shape. The heat of the act mattered. Too little heat, and the seed was weak, unable to spark life. Too much, and the child might be malformed. Balance, again, was everything. And yet, for all their theories, the truth was hidden. Why some women bore child after child, while others remained barren, was a riddle. Physicians wrote thick tomes, monks debated in cloisters, midwives whispered old remedies, but certainty never came. The body kept its secrets. For those troubled by love's sickness, cures were sought. Physicians prescribed cool diets for men overheated by desire: lettuce, cucumbers, violets steeped in wine. For women heavy with longing, baths scented with rosemary and chamomile. Yet alongside learned medicine lived folk wisdom. A girl might tie herbs, sage, fennel, rue, beneath her dress to cool her desires. A boy might carry a lodestone or a scrap of parchment inked with charms to steady his blood. Midwives knew other secrets: whispered prayers, small amulets hung at the neck, powders to be mixed in wine. Some of these remedies were more magic than medicine, but in a world where the boundary between natural and supernatural was thin, both were trusted. The body was both sacred and shameful. To speak of its hungers openly was dangerous. Priests reminded the faithful that flesh was weak, that desire must be bridled, that even within marriage one must tread carefully. Yet the body could not be silenced. Its flushes, its trembling, its monthly rhythms, spoke in ways no sermon could fully quiet. Lovers, when they came together, did so often in shadows and whispers, aware that what they did was both natural and perilous. To touch another's skin was to touch mystery, to enter into the unknown. When we think back to these bodies, centuries ago, we must remember their world of senses. The feel of coarse wool against bare skin, the scent of sweat mixed with lavender water, the taste of honeyed wine on lips, the sound of breath in the silence of a chamber. These were the languages the body spoke, the only ones it had. Without microscopes, without anatomy charts, people read their bodies through sensation, through signs, through the rhythm of pain and pleasure. To live in a medieval body was to live with uncertainty. At any moment, the humors might tip out of balance, desire might become sickness, love might turn to fever. And still, beneath all the fear, there was wonder. For in the end, the body, with all its secrets, was seen as a mirror of God's design. Its mysteries were not flaws, but invitations to humility. To love in such a body, to yearn in it, to ache in it, was to be reminded that one was mortal, fragile, dependent on grace. And perhaps that was part of the sweetness, to burn with love, to tremble with longing, and to know that within the body's secret fires lay both danger and divine gift. The medieval village and castle walls held more than prayers and lawful vows. Behind shutters, behind tapestries, in the shadow of cloisters and gardens, forbidden loves stirred like embers. Desire was not easily confined to the neat lines drawn by priests or parchment law. It crept where it was not invited, and once it had settled into the heart, it could be as heavy as iron, as sweet as honey, and as perilous as fire. From the pulpit, week after week, priests thundered against adultery. To break one's marriage vow was not only to wound a spouse, but to insult God himself. For marriage was a sacrament, sealed before heaven. To defile it was to invite damnation. And yet, the very need for such sermons betrayed a truth. People strayed. The human body, with its hunger for warmth, for touch, for the thrill of newness, often slipped beyond the edges of holy law. The heart, like a restless bird, sometimes sought another perch. To love outside the bond of marriage was dangerous, but the danger was part of its sweetness. Among the nobility, where marriages were often made for power rather than affection, secret affairs could be both frequent and infamous. A lady married to a lord she barely knew might find her heart stirred by a knight in shining mail, a squire with laughing eyes, or even a troubadour with a voice that melted the air. Castles were not large. Behind stone walls, with chambers pressed close together, encounters could happen in dim corridors, on spiral stairs, in gardens at dusk. A hand brushing against another, a word spoken too softly, a letter slipped beneath the door. And yet, discovery was ruin. A noblewoman caught in adultery risked disgrace, confinement, even death. For men, too, there was peril, exile, loss of lands, a swift sword. Still, the stories of courtly love, those romances sung by poets, fed secret dreams. They gave lovers a language, an excuse, a kind of shelter for their forbidden fire. Among peasants, adultery took on a different shape. Marriage was still binding, but lives were lived in close quarters, with little privacy. A glance at the well, a touch while binding sheaves, a secret meeting in the barn loft. These moments burned fiercely in a world where daily toil was heavy and cold. The village remembered everything. Whispers carried quickly, and the price of discovery could be shunning, fines, or penance imposed by the priest. A woman caught in sin might be made to stand before the church in her shift, barefoot, while the villagers looked on. A man might be beaten, or fined, or forced to fast. Yet the heart was stubborn. It reached where it wished, and sometimes, despite fear of shame, lovers met again and again in the fields or in the quiet of the woods. There was one place where secrets of forbidden love poured forth: the confessional. Kneeling before the screen in the dim light of candles, a woman might whisper what her lips dared not speak elsewhere. "Father, I have sinned. I looked upon another with longing. I was not faithful in my heart." The priest would listen, sigh, admonish, and prescribe prayers or penance. Sometimes he would hear more, words trembling with tears, tales of nights stolen, of embraces that could not be untangled. For some, the confessional was relief. For others, it was a torment, because to confess was to recall, to bring the forbidden sweetness back into memory, where it could not easily be forgotten. In the medieval mind, sin and desire were woven tightly. To yearn was dangerous. To indulge was worse. But the church also recognized the power of temptation. Preachers told tales of lovers damned for their lust, consumed by fire in the afterlife. Yet in the same breath, they spoke of mercy, of God's endless forgiveness, if only the sinner repented. This tension gave forbidden loves their edge. Lovers knew they risked both body and soul, yet the flame burned brighter for it. Each stolen kiss carried both ecstasy and dread. Each secret meeting was shadowed by fear of discovery, of confession, of eternal loss. Adultery was not always punished equally. Noblemen could sometimes escape lightly, their wealth protecting them. Women, especially, bore the heavier burden. A lord might send his unfaithful wife to a convent, stripping her of children and lands. In harsher cases, she might be locked away, even killed. Peasant punishments were rougher, but less final. Beatings, fines, shaming. Yet even here, the woman often carried the deeper blame, for the body that bore children carried evidence more easily than the man's. A child born at the wrong time, with the wrong features, was a living mark of forbidden love. And still, despite risk, lovers wrote. A scrap of parchment, folded small, carried beneath a sleeve or tucked into a book of psalms. The letters were rarely long, often only a few lines. "Tonight, when the moon has set, come to the garden gate." Or, "Your eyes are my torment and my salvation." These notes, written with trembling hands, were more dangerous than weapons. If found, they could destroy lives. And yet, they were written, hidden, kissed, carried close to the heart. To live in the Middle Ages was to live under watchful eyes. The priest, the neighbors, the servants, the family. Privacy was scarce. Lovers seeking secrecy had to be clever, quiet, patient. A glance could say what words could not. A shared silence might speak more than a letter. Even so, sometimes the walls cracked. A servant betrayed a mistress. A neighbor overheard. A jealous husband struck. And the forbidden flame was revealed, bringing ruin. Yet, for all its peril, forbidden love never ceased. Perhaps it was because desire grows stronger against resistance. Perhaps it was because the human heart longs most for what it cannot have. Or perhaps, beneath all the sermons and punishments, there was a truth that could not be silenced. That love, even when twisted into sin, remained one of the deepest hungers of the soul. To walk in those medieval nights, down stone passages or across dew-wet fields, was to feel that hunger stirring. The chill of the air on skin, the sound of footsteps echoing too loudly, the throb of blood in the throat. To reach the arms of a forbidden lover was to feel, for a moment, that the world itself had paused, holding its breath. And afterward, guilt, fear, trembling, yet also memory. The warmth of touch lingered, even as the prayers of penance were whispered. To speak of medieval love is to speak not only of marriages and sacraments, but also of these shadows. For the forbidden, the secret, the sinful, shaped hearts as much as holy vows. And in those shadows, beneath fear and shame, the same truth whispered again and again. The human heart, in any century, does not always obey the laws written for it. In medieval Europe, no power loomed more heavily over love and marriage than the Church. Its priests, bishops, and councils shaped not only how people prayed, but also how they lived, loved, and lay together. The heart might beat freely, the body might crave warmth, but above them stood a vigilant eye, the eye of God, interpreted by the Church. It was a gaze both tender and stern, promising forgiveness, but quick to condemn. Marriage was no mere household arrangement in the eyes of the clergy. By the 12th century, it had been firmly declared a sacrament, one of the sacred mysteries by which human beings touched heaven. Thus, the Church claimed authority not only over the altar, but over the marriage bed. Priests instructed couples in their duties, fidelity, fruitfulness, and moderation. To love one's spouse was good, but to lust too fiercely, even within marriage, was frowned upon. To stray beyond marriage was sin. To abandon it was heresy. From cathedrals to village chapels, this teaching was proclaimed with certainty. The Church was not only the guardian of souls, but the overseer of beds, vows, and desires. One of the most complex areas was the law of consanguinity, the rules of blood relation. By the Church's reckoning, no man could marry a woman related to him within 7 degrees, later reduced to 4. These degrees included not only blood ties, but also spiritual kinship, such as godparents. Why? Because marriage was seen as more than private union. It was the weaving of families, the shaping of society. To allow close relatives to wed was considered a threat to moral order. Thus, priests and bishops often found themselves acting as investigators, untangling webs of kinship, deciding whether a marriage was valid, or whether it was sinful, even void. To enforce these laws, the medieval Church held its own courts, ecclesiastical courts, separate from the kings or lords. Here, in chambers heavy with incense and law books, men and women were summoned to answer for matters of the heart. Was a marriage lawful? Had vows been broken? Had adultery occurred? Witnesses were called, oaths sworn, letters produced. A woman might testify that her husband had deserted her. A man might accuse his wife of betrayal. Lovers might be denounced by neighbors, dragged into hearings where every glance and whisper became evidence. The courts were not swift, nor always merciful. Yet they held immense power. For to be condemned was to be branded not merely a lawbreaker, but a sinner. Cases could be strange, even intimate. A wife might claim her husband was impotent, unable to fulfill the marriage bond. In such cases, the Church sometimes ordered the most embarrassing of examinations, requiring witnesses to swear whether the man's body was capable. Other trials delved into whether a marriage had been consummated at all. For without consummation, the Church sometimes declared, a marriage was not fully sealed. Thus, the very secrets of the bed could be dragged into public light, probed and judged by priests and clerics. The irony was heavy. The Church preached chastity, modesty, and shame before sin. Yet its courts often laid bare the most private of matters. When guilt was found, punishment followed. But unlike royal courts, which relied on prison or death, the Church's weapon was penance. A man guilty of adultery might be ordered to fast for months, to walk barefoot to a shrine, to recite hundreds of prayers. A woman might be required to stand before her parish in humble garments, confessing her fault. In harsher cases, both men and women could be separated from their spouses, forbidden from certain sacraments, or confined to a convent or monastery. The purpose always was correction, not only of the body, but of the soul. Yet the weight of shame could be unbearable, and many bore the scars of public penance long after prayers had been said. It was not only priests and bishops who enforced the rules. Every village and town acted as the church's eyes. Neighbors watched neighbors. Servants reported on their masters. A slip of conduct, a smile too long, a meeting too late at night, could stir whispers, and whispers could turn into accusations. The line between gossip and evidence was thin. Ecclesiastical courts thrived on testimony, and villagers were quick to supply it. Thus, private lives were rarely private. The village was both cradle and cage. There were those who resisted. Some lovers, bound by deep passion, refused to bow to the church's rulings. They wed without permission, or they eloped, or they continued their secret affairs despite threats of damnation. The church could excommunicate them, casting them out of the sacraments, branding them as outcasts. Yet even this was not always enough to quench love's fire. The tension between law and desire was constant. The church claimed mastery over the soul, yet the heart often proved wilder than canon law could tame. And yet, for all its sternness, the church also offered mercy. In the quiet of confession, sins of love were often forgiven. A priest might scold, but he also absolved. A soul bowed in true repentance could always find the promise of redemption. This balance between severity in court and gentleness in confession was central to the church's hold. It could both terrify and comfort, punish and pardon. Thus it kept the hearts of medieval men and women in its grasp. To live in the Middle Ages was to live under this watchful gaze, a gaze that could bless or curse, marry or annul, pardon or damn. The church was not only the shepherd of souls, it was the keeper of desire, the judge of love. Some found safety in this order, believing it kept sin at bay. Others chafed beneath it, longing for freedom. But whether in village huts or castle halls, none could entirely escape it. The church's eye followed them from cradle to grave, from vows spoken at the altar to the final prayers whispered at the deathbed. And always, behind that eye, there was the weight of a question that no law could fully answer. Could love itself ever be judged? Or was it beyond the reach of courts and penance? As the medieval centuries unfolded, countless men and women took to the roads, dusty, winding, endless roads that stretched from one village to another, from England to Rome, from France to Compostela, from the quiet chapel down the lane to the glittering shrines of saints. They traveled as sinners, seeking forgiveness, as the sick, seeking healing, as wanderers, seeking grace. Yet woven through these pilgrimages was also something far more fragile, far more secret, the seeking heart. A pilgrimage was not only a journey of the feet, but a journey of the soul. Along the road, ordinary rules sometimes softened. A husband could part from his wife, a wife from her husband, each claiming the excuse of devotion. A lover might vanish into the throng of pilgrims, returning weeks or months later, with stories of relics touched and prayers whispered. For some, these journeys truly were sacred. Penance for sins, offerings of gratitude, acts of humility. For others, they were also a chance to breathe more freely, to step for a time beyond the gaze of neighbors and priests. And sometimes, they were a chance to love more freely too. At shrines, pilgrims knelt before reliquaries gleaming with gold and gems, kissed glass that enclosed the bone of a saint, pressed foreheads against stone, said to bear holy footprints. They whispered prayers for children, for health, for forgiveness, but also, quietly, for love. A young woman might pray to Saint Margaret for a kind husband. A widow might seek strength to raise her children alone. A knight might beg the Virgin to protect his lady. And lovers, trembling in secrecy, might dare to pray that their union, though forbidden, could be spared from discovery. The holy relics heard all, or so the people believed. Bones and cloth and fragments of the cross became keepers of hopes too tender to confess aloud. The road was long, and pilgrims walked together, sang together, shared food, laughter, and stories. A woman in coarse wool might walk beside a merchant in fine cloak, or a farmer beside a nobleman's son. Status mattered less on the road, for all wore dust, all bore blisters, all longed for the same distant shrines. In this mingling, hearts sometimes stirred. Eyes met across campfires, voices softened in the evening hush. Bonds formed, fleeting or lasting. Some friendships blossomed into affection, some affections into love. Not every meeting was chaste, not every union holy. But on the pilgrimage road, boundaries blurred, and for a time, love found space to breathe outside the rigid walls of village and court. Yet every pilgrimage had an end. The road wound home again, feet sore and souls reshaped. Some returned radiant with peace, others weary but wiser. Some carried relics tied in little pouches around their necks. Others carried memories of chance meetings, of glances exchanged beneath stars, of prayers whispered together. For many, pilgrimage renewed the bonds of marriage. A husband might greet his wife with tears. A wife might welcome her husband with joy, both convinced that heaven had blessed their union anew. For others, the return was bittersweet. Home meant again the watchful eyes of neighbors, the stern authority of priests, the weight of duty. But always, deep within, there remained the memory of the road, that brief space where love and freedom had walked side by side. By the close of the Middle Ages, the Church had defined marriage as sacred. Law had tangled it in rules, custom had bound it in duty. Yet for all these chains, love itself remained strangely untamed. Sometimes it bowed to law and found peace. Sometimes it burned through restraint, leaving scandal in its wake. Sometimes it hid, quietly, in prayers and letters and glances, safe only in memory. The medieval heart was no different from our own. It longed to love and be loved, to give itself, to find warmth in the night and meaning in the day. Neither canon law, nor village gossip, nor even penance could strip that longing away. So let us imagine now, one last evening in a medieval village. The sun sets behind thatched roofs. The church bell tolls. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth. In a small chamber, a husband and wife spread out linen sheets, their hands brushing, their eyes shy but kind. In another corner of the village, a widow sits by her hearth, whispering a prayer to the Virgin for strength. A young man, restless, gazes out into the night, dreaming of a woman he loves but cannot have. Somewhere far away, pilgrims walk still, under moonlight, toward shrines that promise mercy. And above them all, the stars shine, as they always have, as they always will, silent witnesses to the mysteries of love, desire, and the human soul. What, then, was medieval sex and love really like? It was sacred and sinful, tender and fearful, bound by rules yet constantly slipping through them. It was the warmth of the marriage bed and the danger of the secret tryst, the blessing of the priest and the risk of the gossiping neighbor. It was, in truth, simply human, as fragile as breath, as enduring as stone. And though centuries divide us from those villagers, those knights and ladies, those pilgrims, their hearts beat no differently from ours. They too knew the sweetness of a lover's touch, the ache of absence, the relief of forgiveness, the courage of fidelity. Their love was watched by priests, bound by laws, measured by penance. But still, it was love. And in the quiet of night, when candles burned low and only the soft sounds of breath and rustling cloth remained, it was love that endured.